I'm Jonathan Larson with TYT Investigates, and last year the Young Turks launched a crowdfunding drive to support coverage of climate change, especially in relation to the presidential election. And what we ended up doing was crowdfunding for a climate change investigative reporter.
And that would be me.
That would be Ti-Hua Chang here, who is joining us as of today as our full-time investigative reporter dedicated to the issue of climate change, especially in regard to the presidential election and the 2020 elections overall. So, Ti-Hua, I know we're not supposed to
Yes,
shake
sir.
hands anymore,
We'll
but I
wash our
just want,
hands
yeah,
afterwards.
exactly. So welcome aboard.
Thank you.
I'm thrilled to have you.
I'm
And
excited to be here.
and I don't know, folks, especially in New York, you should be familiar with Tiwa's name, but if not, tell us a little bit about some of the places where you've worked and
Well,
your career has been.
like Johnny Cash, I've been everywhere. I, uh, I've been, well, in New York City. I'm born and raised in New York City, but I worked at ABC News at Primetime Live as an investigative producer. And then I worked at WCBS, then got laid off, then went to WNBC, and then got laid off again and went back to WCBS. And then I went to Fox, WWR Channel 9. Then I went to Fox 5 Local. And then I went to Network, CBS Evening News on the weekend edition. And then I left that job, New York City. And it's mostly local, but some national and international reporting as well over the years. So if you live in New York City, you probably see my face and go, I've seen you. That's what people say on the subway. Yeah, yeah, I know you.
And I want to talk about some of the specific reporting that you've done. I think for the Young Turks audience in particular, some of the work you've done is going to be especially meaningful to them. Before we do that, let's play the how many awards have you won game, right?
Oh, yeah.
So
Some of them behind me, but I only
that's
do
right.
that so people would be more impressed with me since they're usually not. But
It worked on me. It worked on me when I came in. So I believe, let's see if I can do this from memory. You have roughly 60 awards,
roughly something I
roughly.
never counted. I should count someday.
And how many rhyme with Peabody?
One Peabody, one Morrow, five Emmys, uh, NABJ, AAJ, a bunch of awards, and let's see, AP, UPI, Denver, Detroit, um, New York Press Club, and a bunch, a lot of awards. So it's funny, and it's funny because when I was growing up, I never got any awards.
Uh-huh.
And my brother, who's like the good kid,
Right.
he had a whole book of public school awards they give you, for clean nails, this, nice, and that. I had one for not missing class for one quarter, and that was it. So I think as I got older, I said, I want to win some awards like my brother. So and then I got carried away.
Clean nails, Peabody.
Yeah, something like that.
That's
It's funny.
fantastic.
But he had a book this thick
Right.
of all his public school awards, and he was a crossing guard, and I had like one card. So anyway,
Well, now you can go back to him and say, "I win."
no, it's one of those classic things, when you get beat up and then you become some boxing champion or something
Right,
like
right,
that. So
right.
like,
So, two stories that we've talked about before that you did that I was hoping you would share.
sure,
One, of course, concerns Medgar, the civil rights
right.
activist.
My
Tell us a
favorite
little bit.
story.
Yeah.
So Medgar was a civil rights leader, he was assassinated in 1963, June of 1963, shot from behind by a white supremacist. Murdered and assassinated really in cold blood from 200 yards away. Cowardly assassination. And he crawled 38 feet from his car to the front of his door so that he could die in his wife's arms in front of his three children. And he was the head of the NAACP in Mississippi at a time of virulent racism in Mississippi, or much more blatant than it is today. I was sent in 1990, 27 years later, to do a story on how his assassin uh, would never go to jail. Because what had happened was there were two hung juries in the 60s against a man named Byron de la Beckwith, who clearly had committed the crime. They had the gun with his fingerprint. The gun had a scope. He had a cut over his eye that fit perfectly in the scope. It was obvious he had done it, but this is during a period of deep segregation, and two all-white juries, all white male juries, could not convict him. They actually had hung juries, which was surprising at the time, because usually at that time it'd be like, oh, not guilty. But he was so guilty that half the people had enough of a conscience to say he's so guilty, it's ridiculous. But anyway, so he was a free man. He ended up going to prison for attempting to attack a Jewish temple in New Orleans. He had some semi-automatic weapons and a bomb in his car when he got caught. But in any case, but he still was free when I went down in 1990. And what had happened was that a reporter named Jerry Mitchell at the Clarion Ledger had gotten some documents from the Mississippi Sovereignty Commission, which was a state-run commission dedicated to segregation. And what happened was it turned out that this state-run commission was helping with Beckwith's, the assassin's defense. At the same time, the state of Mississippi was trying to prosecute. So you basically had, a conflict of interest of the state. And so that many of the African American community groups said, we should have, this should be a mistrial. We should. Peter said, no, that's not enough reason. So the case was dead. And so I was sent down to Mississippi to try and find out, try and do a story on how the assassin would never go to jail. But while I was down there, I had been a crime reporter in Detroit, and at the time, the Detroit administration did not felt that the media was all pro-white and anti-black, so they wouldn't give reporters any information. So I was I was the crime reporter, and I'd go to a crime scene. The police wouldn't tell me anything. So I went and got a book called How to Investigate a Crime, and it was from the Federal Bookstore. It was a little book, and it was very good. It was a very good compendium on what to do. And so I became my own crime investigator over 5 years in Detroit during the crack cocaine era. And then, so when I got to Jackson, Mississippi, where Medgar Evers lived, I thought, okay, I had his widow, Merle Evers Williams, gave me a copy of the carbon copy of the transcript, which I still have and would like to give to some museum. It's a carbon copy of the second trial, and they actually typed on a typewriter, carbon copy. And I looked through it and I thought to myself, okay, how would I investigate this as an investigator, meaning a real criminal investigator? And I thought, if I were to kill Medgar Evers, what I would do is I would go to where his last public appearance would be that night, and I'd follow him home. So I checked the transcript, and it said that he stopped by a Baptist church at 9:30 p.m. And then he was assassinated within an hour and a half or so. And I thought, well, that's exactly what I would do. I'd go to that place. So I went to that church, trying to backtrack 27 years later the steps of the killer. And so when I got to the church, apparently there's a Baptist tradition where you have to, when you come to church, you stand up and say why you're there. And as a journalist, you're not supposed to do that, right? And this is good for young Turks. As a rule breaker myself, I just thought it was so disrespectful to this church and very, very sincere people. All they were asking me to do was be respectful and stand up and say why I was there. So, I know as a journalist I'm not supposed to do that, but I said, what the heck. So I stood up and I said, I'm a reporter. I'm from ABC News, and I'm an investigative producer. I've covered many stories in my life, thousands, and every one of them had two sides. I said, except this story. This story has one side, it's the right side, and it's Medgar's side. And somebody said, amen. And having been an anti-war activist in college, anti-Vietnam War, some of you may not remember that, but it got me started, and I just kept talking. I don't know what I was talking with, the investigation and segregation. I ended up giving a little speech, and there were more amens, and I got carried away, and I just spoke for a while, for about 5 to 10 minutes, and when I was done, a pastor who up to that point had refused to talk to me, or at least give me information, came up to me and said, I saw the killer at this church that night, 9:30 p.m. And I said, did you ever tell him? When he said he'd never told, obviously, local law enforcement who were, Klan's member. He'd never told the FBI. He'd never told any other reporters, including Andy Rooney, who then tried to do this story 10 years before me. And they didn't trust anybody. But after my little speech, they trusted me. And also, I think because I wasn't white, and I'm Asian American, they saw that I'm a person of color, and so, and he said that, and then another guy named Willie Peoples, because I know this guy was an activist. So then there was a guy named Willie Peoples who was a church member. He said I saw, and I talked to him. He saw, and I ended up getting 4 witnesses who had seen Byron de la Beckwith at that church, the killer at the church at 9:30, just before the last stop Medgar Evers made that night, public stop. And so I put 2 on television, and I intentionally kept 2 off of TV in case the Klan or someone wanted to kill everybody or at least threaten them. So 2 were unknown. I didn't tell anybody who they were. And then, and when I did that, Bobby DeLauder, who was the assistant DA working on the case, as soon as I told him I had 4 witnesses, he followed up and he interviewed them. And what's interesting is that after we put this report on Primetime Live, Diane Sawyer called up Ed Peters, the prosecutor, the Hinds County District Attorney, and said, "Mr. Peters, this is Diane Sawyer. Are you going to prosecute?" And this is like Zeus calling from Mount Olympus. For someone in a small little county in Jackson, Mississippi, Diane Sawyer is calling. So you have the national spotlight. You have 4 new witnesses, and so and there was one more element I actually didn't tell you about, and this was my favorite part. And to give you a sense of what I'm like, the governor of Mississippi refused to do an interview about this story. And so I had my associate producer call him up and say, "We would like to get your exact quote on refusing to talk to us about the assassination of Medgar Evers, because when I go on national television, I want to be able to tell people exactly what the governor of Mississippi said when he refused to talk about this assassination." And I am convinced, because my first job was in Biloxi, Mississippi as a TV reporter, I am convinced that the powers that be in Mississippi had a little meeting and said, "We got to give up, this boy," meaning Byron de la Beckwith, an old man at the time. He said, "He's not worth the trouble. This is too much. We can't have a national spotlight. It's going to be
They
bad
cut
for us.
bait.
It's going to be going to cut because it's going to be bad for business." And I think that's what they decided. And then they indicted Byron de la Beckwith again. And one last story. Do you want to hear one last story about this? This is
Yeah.
my favorite story.
Yeah,
so
yeah.
I won't talk about all of them.
This is history.
This is history. So at one point, I had called up Bobby DeLauder, and I said, this is just before they made the decision to indict. And he told me, off the record, he said, "Listen, we're going to present this to a grand jury. I'm telling you that on background only." And I said, "Okay." I said, "And do you have enough?" And he said, "Well, it's like," I said, "Bobby, there's something you've got to look at on this video." He said, "What is it?" I said, "I can't tell you. And that, I can't cross that line. Your government, I can't do that." So he kept at it. He said, "I've gone over every frame of your report. What is it? What's missing?" And finally I thought, I said to myself again, "Oh, what the heck?" And I said, "Look, off the record, you got to look at how Byron de la Beckwith, the assassin, stands when we said goodbye to him, and how Willie Peoples stands, showing how Byron de la Beckwith stood in the back of the church. And in each instance, Beckwith, when the crew left, he had his leg up like this. So I show you like this. He had one leg up like this as he leaned against the wall. One leg up as he leaned against the wall. Willie Peoples did the same thing with the other leg, which, when someone's telling the truth, it's never exactly the same. And so that little bit, so I told Bobby, I said, "Look at how they're standing." I said, "I can't tell you anymore." And what he did, when he looked at it, he said, "Oh my God." And the last thing they showed the grand jury, they did a split screen of Byron de la Beckwith, the assassin, standing with one leg up, and Willie Peoples, the witness, standing with one leg up. That was the last thing they showed the grand jury, and the grand jury indicted.
And he ended up going to prison.
He ended up going to prison. And they were able to discount some of the eyewitness identification, but that forced them to basically indict him again because the publicity was just too much. They couldn't handle it anymore.
And moving forward a few decades, tell us your Rudy Giuliani story.
Okay, this will be a lot shorter, I promise. So let me go forward a little. On 9/11, Rudy Giuliani had placed his Office of Emergency Management right at the World Trade Center. The Twin Towers are here. 7 World Trade Center is literally like 30, 40 feet, well, maybe, what, half a block across the street. Right next to, it's part of the World Trade Center. And on 9/11, the building collapsed, and that OEM center, which was on the 23rd floor, also collapsed. And then it caught fire because Rudy Giuliani had put all these gasoline tanks underneath it because he wanted to be able to stay there for weeks at a time. Illegal tanks, by the way. Anyway, so that happened on 9/11. A year before, a little bit more than a year before, well, a year and a half before almost, in December of 1999, I ran an investigative story, 2 investigative stories back to back, 23 minutes, which for local TV is unprecedented. It was like 12 minutes one night, 11 minutes the other night, lead story each night, and nobody turned the TV off, which was unusual at the time. Usually there's a big drop after the first block. Anyway, so I ran a story saying the only reason why Rudy Giuliani put his OEM, or Office of Emergency Management, his emergency center at 7 World Trade Center at the Bullseye was because he got a $50,000 campaign contribution from Larry Silverstein, the owner of the World Trade Center, both 7 World Trade Center and the Twin Towers. And that it was actually too much money. They had to reduce it to 44,600. But in any case, I said that was the reason why he put that OEM center in the worst possible place. And it wasn't just me saying this. Bill Bratton, the former police commissioner who reduced crime in New York City, he said it. The former mayor, Ed Koch, said that. The former New York State Attorney General said he would have filed a criminal investigation. And of course, the Citizens Union ethicist said that this was obviously wrong to do. So, and that was an interesting story that we said this may be the wrong day to say it, but my bosses made me say that yes, he put it in the wrong place, obviously.
And one reason, of course, everyone understood that that was a bad idea was it had literally been the target of a deadly terrorist attack in the early 90s.
Before, 1993, February of 1993, 7 World Trade Center, there was a bomb.
Truck bomb.
You put it, a truck bomb. Well, a van. They put a
Right.
van, and it didn't blow. It blew up, but the tower withstood it. But this was the bullseye. This was, everybody knew this. Everybody knew it was the bullseye. How do you put your emergency center at the bullseye? It makes no sense.
Right.
And right now, the New York City's Office of Emergency Management is nowhere near the World Trade Center.
So let's talk. Thank you for the work and for sharing the story. Let's talk a little bit about the fact that you have the background you do, and yet we're able to scoop you up, right? This is something that you and I have talked about before, and you have some thoughts on why that is in terms of the industry at large and who they hire and who they don't.
Well, I'm old. I'm 69 years old, and that's probably first and foremost. And secondly, as an Asian male, my entire career is not, I'm not somebody anybody wants. I mean, based on my ethnicity and my gender. So, although
So just to be clear, you just think there's ageism and there's racial discrimination at work in the hiring.
Yes, and also I think part of it too is that a number of news managers believe that I'm they call me, let's see, what do they call me? He thinks he's Mr. Journalism and he's full of integrity. So I think I also am someone that's viewed as, you can't buy me. And I'm going to report what I believe to be as close to the truth as I can, and that's it. And I have that reputation, and that basically I'm a pain in the tutkas. Stutkas?
Tukas?
Tukas, that's right. Sorry. New York.
Lives in New York.
I should know Yiddish better. So, but a pain in the behind because he's too difficult in terms of integrity. So I think I'm perfect for Young Turks. I think this is exactly the kind of organization that wants somebody that goes after people who deserve to be going after. For example, the climate change deniers and the global warming facilitators, or as I'm told your audience likes to hear, the evil people in climate change.
It's a little bit of a cultural adjustment, and I've got a background in mainstream news as well, and we're sort of taught and it's inculcated not to describe people by what we think their inner motives are or what have you.
Right.
But obviously, the TYT audience, when someone does a thing that's evil, they don't want people to mince words, whether it's the reporters or the commentators or what have you. But we're still, I suspect, both sensitive to how we do that.
Well, I'm still going to report the same way I always
Right.
have, which is as close to the truth as I can,
Right.
whether I like it or not.
Yeah.
I mean, that's always been what I've done, regardless of where I've worked. And I worked before CBS Network. I worked at a local Fox station. So anybody want to criticize me for doing Young Turks? This is my penance for working at Fox, local Fox station. So
We are gonna take some questions for Ti-Hua, but I did want to talk. So I've got the chat on my lap here. So if you have questions for Ti-Hua, we'll get to them in a second. So
can we
I'll put
talk
them in
about
now.
something about objectivity, though?
Yes, please.
Okay, so here's an interesting story, I think. This is something I learned a long time ago. When I was in grad school for journalism at Columbia, my professor was a guy named Fred Friendly. If you're young, you don't know who he is. If you're older and you're in journalism, you should know who he is because he was the producer for Edward R. Murrow, who's like the patron saint of broadcast journalism, CBS News, founder, practically. And in my first broadcast class at Columbia, he showed a story by a CBS correspondent named Morton Dean on a new anti-personnel weapon being used in Vietnam. And what it was, you drop a bomb and all these nails, like the size of your fingers practically, would shoot every few inches, cover every few inches for 100 yards. And the idea was that you maim people, meaning you cripple them, because it takes 4 or 5 people to take care of a cripple as opposed to just killing someone. And that was the intent of this anti-personnel weapon.
So you could sideline many more
Right.
people
But it's
by
really-
requiring them to care for the
When you
wounded.
think about it, every few inches, a nail goes through your body. And so Morton Dean showed it on a piece of wood. That's how the Army would only let him do it. And so Fred Friendly asked everyone in the class, the up-and-coming young students, and what do you think of the story? And they said, oh, it was well written, it was well done, it was good editing, and then it came to me. And I'm sitting there as, a former anti-Vietnam War activist, and I'm sitting there going, geez.
You're a student in the
I'm a
class.
student. I got a partial fellowship, I'm amazed I even got in, and I should just keep my mouth shut. And then I said to myself, the F word. And I said, F it. And I just said, listen, if it were me doing that story, I would show the bodies. Because that's what an anti-personnel weapon is for. It's not for pieces of wood, it's for human beings. And my whole class attacked me. Oh, you're not being neutral, you're taking a position. And I said, oh, so if you had covered the Nazi concentration camps, instead of showing the dead bodies, 6 million dead bodies, you would just show gas chamber doors opening and closing because that'd be more artistic. I'm like, oh no, that's different. I said, why is that different? Because it's a different race? Because it's Asians? Oh no, don't call us racist. My whole class was attacking me, including my best friend, who's still my friend today. And I was trying to say, and I did not successfully say that, but it taught me this, that neutrality is not necessarily objectivity, and objectivity is not necessarily neutrality. Sometimes. And you can't just say both sides, and that's telling the truth. So when we're all done, and everyone's done yelling at me, and I'm done yelling at them, and we were all kind of worn out. One guy actually called me dangerous.
Let's hope so.
Then was Fred Friendly. Dangerous in not in a good way, though. So Fred Friendly now speaks, and he said, if Edward R. Murrow were here today, and I thought he was going to say he kicked Ti-Hua out of the school. He said but he said he would back Ti-Hua because sometimes you have to take a stand. And what's interesting is that when Edward R. Murrow took down Joe McCarthy during the Red Scare in the 50s and the blacklisting of people, after they took him down, they lost their jobs because Alcoa stopped its funding. And so
That was the company that sponsored the news.
their news program.
Yeah.
They had a news program. And so they lost their jobs. And Fred Friendly said to me the next day, what I learned was the most important thing I'll ever learn at Columbia. He said, but you're going to get fired a lot. And I have been. I've been fired or let go. Never fired, which is for malfeasance, but I've been let go 7 times. 7 times? I think 7 times out of 11 jobs. And I have to say, most of them, in my opinion, were because I wasn't either the right fit, or and then later because I'm older, but also because they thought, oh, this guy thinks he's Mr. Journalism
Yeah.
and goes after people. And a couple of times I was openly told, you went after the wrong elected official, and the company likes that person. I was actually told that one time.
You've come to the right place.
Well, I hope so, and then I hope I can find some stuff that makes a difference. I
Yeah.
said to my kids, I'm proud of doing this. Climate change, I mean, Young Turks should be complimented because this is a great position, whether it be me or someone else. Climate change is so important. I mean, it's like, and people are ignoring it. It's kind of like death. People are ignoring death, but this is something you cannot ignore. We cannot ignore the potential death of the planet.
One thing I did want to say is we're going to need your help in addition to the funding that a lot of you have already provided, because a lot of reporting, important reporting about climate change, about the pernicious effect of money in politics behind climate change, doesn't get picked up. It doesn't get reported on. Politicians don't feel a need to respond to it. So as Ti-Hua's reports come out there from TYT, we're going to need your help getting them out, getting the word out, and getting people to respond to
Oh, I
them.
thought you were going to do a pitch for money again. Sorry, it sounded
No.
just like one of those PBS
I always
pitches.
know. Well, I always
Okay.
try, because sometimes we get donations in the chat. People can actually
Oh,
donate
okay.
money, and I'm always flustered
wasn't
when they
asking
do.
for money.
Right, exactly. But I always like to make. I don't want anyone to feel bad if they can't donate money. But
yeah.
and donating time and energy and engagement in social media,
That's
that
more
helps us
important.
too.
That's more important. Actually. Or equally
I'm
important.
kidding. I'm kidding.
Equally
Okay,
important.
so we've got a couple comments here
Okay.
before we go. Katie Kane says, "Looking hella good."
Okay. Thank you, Katie.
Mr. Elder says, "Past work doesn't count in my book. What is done now is what counts."
I respectfully disagree. I think past work can be an indication, but you're right. Present work and future work is more important than what was done in the past.
Fair enough. Bookaholic Blue says, 69 looks great. Presidential nominees are older
This is true. I feel like a youngster.
and looks great. Barbara Crisp says, "I'm old. LOL doesn't look old to me." So everyone's talking about the age stuff. I don't know if we're being discriminatory by talking about it or not, but I for one, was thrilled to have someone who had the breadth and depth of experience that you had. So,
Well, that's pretty unusual in journalism, though.
well, I liked the integrity thing. I liked the journalism thing. So maybe this is why I'm not in there either. Joyfully Dreaded 13 says, "He looks great for 69. Gotta love our Asian genes."
My son told me an expression.
Yeah.
Have you heard it?
I don't know.
Asian don't raisin.
I'm going to stay way far away from that. Let's see.
Okay.
RB says, "You don't look a day over 60. LOL.
Yeah.
Katie Kane says, "I've been passed over for jobs because I had too high morals."
Ah. Hey, kudos to you, Katie.
Yeah. Oh, look at that. Someone just showed. Ed just kicked in $2.
$2.
Thank
Thanks,
you, Ed. Katie Kane says, "I've been let go for insubordination multiple times, and once or twice for doing a job better than all the other employees. They gang up on the person working the hardest."
That did happen to me one time when I was working. A reporter came up to me and said, "You're working too hard. You're making us look bad. Stop." And I looked at her and I thought she was kidding. I said, "You're kidding, right?" And she wasn't. I said, "Okay." I said, "Listen, I'm sorry, but this is the way I work." That was, so I understand what you're went through.
Doug Grinberg says, "Ti-Hua Chang, climate change investigative reporter." I'm not sure if that's a question or just sort of applause or IDing you. Let's see what else we've got here. Joe OWS says, "Never apologize for doing what you had to do to survive. We have all been there." Katie Kane says, "Are you single, sir?"
No, married, 2 kids, with a really strong-willed wife.
Yikes. Lance A says, "Keep being insubordinate." Mr. Elder says, I'll give him a chance. I've got to because TYT hired him." Smiley face.
Oh, thank you very much. Give me a chance. But remember, this is investigative. Real investigative work does not happen overnight
Right, right.
unless somebody's making stuff up.
And James Harris says, and this requires some explanation, would you consider growing facial hair periodically for us to compliment you on? So I'm terrible about
Oh,
shaving. So basically what happens is people are like, oh, you're growing a beard, that's great. And then by the time
really?
people start to notice it, I get tired of it and I shave it off.
Oh, well, just so you know, my wife does not like my stubble. So I just shaved this morning out of respect to everybody, mainly to my wife, because she said, put on a nice suit and shave. I said, okay, honey. So, if everybody wants me to grow, I like to just grow it because I don't like shaving that
Right.
much, to be honest. But
And Curious Cleo says, do you have any ideas of first reporting you might do? And
well, I have
yeah,
a bunch of ideas
right,
that
yeah.
I gave him. I don't know which ones Jonathan's going to approve of, but there are a whole bunch of things that I'll tell you one that's kind of fun, and I'll just mention. It's not. I don't think this will be done, but it's a lot of what's happening now reminds me of the catalytic converter. I don't know if you're older, you remember when the catalytic converter first came out in the 60s and was made law in 1970. A lot of people said this is un-American. It's violating my individual rights to be able to have the most powerful car that I want. Because a catalytic converter takes the exhaust from a car engine, reduces the power by 10%, but reduces the pollution by 90 something percent. And so for the longest time, for years, people complained about the catalytic converter. And then, it's un-American. This is not the way. This is the typical socialist nonsense, blah, blah. And then the air started to clean up in every single city. And then Los Angeles, which always had constant smog because of the inversion they had with the mountains and
The
the way
water.
it's called inversion and stuff. And you basically have a mountain blocking the air, and even that air cleaned up. And so it turned out that in most of the major cities of the United States, 70%, the air was cleared up by 70%. And after that, all of a sudden, nobody complains about the catalytic converter. And I think hopefully that will be a lesson for us in terms of climate change, in terms of, using wind and solar and geothermal and different sources of energy and getting away from fossil fuel, that people will say, oh my God, the air is cleaner, the water is cleaner, the temperature, we're not having tornadoes anymore, we're not flooding. And why didn't they do that sooner? So I'm hoping that would be a great example. But that was one of the stories I listed, but that it's up to him. So if you don't like the stories I do, blame Jonathan.
I would respectfully say also blame Ti-Hua.
Okay.
No, I'm kidding. I'm kidding. I think we can. Just so folks know, I'm actually going to be on vacation next week. So Ti-Hua and I are going to work out. Maybe I'll tape some. Maybe Ti-Hua will pick up the reins next week. But I do want to give him some time to get up to speed and make all the contacts you need to. There's a lot of research
This is my
involved.
first day. So
That's right.
keep
This
that
is
in
literally
mind.
day one. It hasn't even had lunch yet. So we're gonna have a ramp up. But I wanted you folks to meet Ti-Hua. I wanted you to meet the gang. And I guess that's it for now. Unless there's anything else you want to add.
I don't know, this is silly, but do we do TYT investigates?
I like that. I like that. We're gonna have to figure out. Maybe we can use the Pete Buttigieg song now that he's not using it anymore. They had that
Yeah,
dance.
and because, well, let's see, because of you.
No, not because of you.
Okay.
All right. All right. So if we didn't get to your chat, please remember you can always dump it in the comments, and I'll come back and take a look after the fact, and or Ti-Hua will once we get him set up to respond to everything. Where are you on Twitter so that people can follow you and we can up your Twitter game?
Oh, Twitter is at Ti-Hua Chang, my name. No hyphen in there. And it's just, I'm on Twitter, I'm on Instagram, I'm on Facebook, all the social media, WeChat, WhatsApp, Signal. I mean, I'm on all of them and stuff.
And if anyone has tips for Ti-Hua, you can reach out to him on Twitter. You can also email us securely at theyoungturks@protonmail.com. Just keep in mind, if you want it to be secure, it has to be secure on your end as well. So use Proton Mail. So there's a lot of different ways you can get to us. If you want to send any tips our way
You
for
can just do
Ti-Hua.
tchang at tyt.com/investigates, correct?
Not for email. Not for email. No.
Oh, okay.
And if you want to send it
Sorry.
securely, Proton Mail is probably the
Proton
best way
Mail.
to go.
I
Yeah,
don't
yeah.
have Proton Mail yet. But
Well, this account is our tip line. It's for all of us.
Oh,
So,
okay. Well,
yeah,
I do
exactly.
know. I stand
Exactly.
corrected.
That's
Sit
right.
corrected.
All right. So thanks very much. Take care of each other. Take care of yourselves, and we'll see you tomorrow here at TYTI Daily. Bye, guys.
Bye.